And what we will do is we'll also just do a little bit of backup and review to reinforce a few concepts that are really, really important. Okay, now, again, we're not going to debate the issue here, but what we are going to do is use the Dobbs case out of Mississippi as an example of how rare the overturning of precedent is. Stare decisis is simple. It says, leave a previous decision alone and base future decisions based on that precedent. Okay. Why do we do that? We had a discussion already in this class. It gives stability to the law. If the law changes with every court case, then you have what? Every single judge is a law unto themselves. There has to be some structure to it. This idea of precedent law, we inherited from England. We are a legal system of precedents. What was decided before should guide what is decided today. Okay? Now, when you teach a class like this, though, what we talk about are the big cases that set the precedent. So, for example, the case out of Utah, what was the name of the case that set the precedent on how we define the exercise versus the establishment clause? Yes.
Reynolds versus the state.
Exactly. Do you remember how far back it went? 18 something?
1897.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but it's still the precedent. You go back to that, you reference that case in your arguments, and it's a good precedent. It works. It makes sense, right? Obviously, conditions have changed. Sensibilities have changed, right? The issue that drove that case might not drive it today, but the idea that there are some people like Warren Jeffs, and we gave you some examples, that could use their religion for extreme behavior. Well, as Jefferson said to the Danbury Baptist, it reaches actions only, not your belief. You can believe whatever you want, but actions can be stopped if they're harmful, if they're, illegal and against the law. All right, this is a fascinating case. It's gone on for 48 years now, nearly 50. Roe v. Wade set the precedent. It was reinforced in other cases. Over and over again, courts would decide against this precedent. States challenged the law again and again and again. Precedent stood. And Planned Parenthood v. Casey was the latest kind of little tweak to Roe v. Wade that reinforced that precedent. So it's going to take, some say, an activist court put this in the place in the first place. It's going to take another activist court to undo it. And they've got the vehicle to do it. It's the Mississippi law, Dobbs versus Jackson. And the case that we heard for people listening to this tape years from now, December 1st, which was just a couple days ago in Supreme Court, is one of those monumental cases that simply do not come around every day. The last time we had a case of this importance to review was 1954 in what? Brown versus Board. I'll go into more of that later. But even one of the justices from the bench mentioned that. It's a big issue. It's an important issue, and you need to follow this case. The decision won't be arrived at, or let's say they've arrived at the decision. They probably voted already. They probably vote today, but then they have to write the opinions and whatever. And so usually they won't release the opinions till midsummer. Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to teach you is the Supreme Court's process. And hopefully we've done that pretty well. All right, so precedent-setting cases then. You get a feeling like, oh, all the cases the Supreme Court decides are precedent. No, mostly they just reaffirm most decisions. But in this case, they set a new precedent. This is the Miranda case. We have in the Constitution a presumption of innocence, right? These are secured by the 5th and 6th Amendments. We believe in this, innocent till proven guilty. Okay, so when somebody is arrested for a crime, we don't call them guilty. A lot of people want to do that. Oh, that's terrible what that person did. They did this, they did that. The thing is, no, we don't know yet. The presumption is one of innocence. So we use a key term. It's a very important term. It's called alleged. The alleged criminal. That means he's been accused or she's been accused. It doesn't mean that they're guilty. When you hear the word alleged, it simply says they're in the early phases of a legal process, which has to follow the due process of law to get to guilt or innocence, not guilt, excuse me, guilty or not guilty. All right, now here was what happened with Miranda to review the case. Arizona man caught, I think it was a robbery, something like that. Anyway, arrested, and he didn't know his rights. They interrogated him without a lawyer for some time period, so quite a while, until he confessed everything. And then they used that against him in court. Okay, here's the thing. The court ruled that you can't do that. That's a violation of someone's due process. Well, he should have known the law. How many Americans know the law? How many have had a class like this, right? So most Americans are ignorant of it. So it's your job as the police and as the prosecutors to make sure that the person who is alleged to have done a crime knows what their rights are. And they train in it at the police academy. They train in it in law school. This is understood. It goes back to English law. The English do this. We inherited this from English law. In England, they say a very similar thing to this. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to speak to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights and have they been read to you? This is the actual statement that the police memorize. And every time they do arrest, they have to go through it. Okay, now listen, why silence? We talked about this before. You get flustered, you get worried, you get a lawyer there to help guide you through this so that your alleged crime can be adjudicated under due process of law. Miranda was let go because they didn't follow his rights. All right, here's the next case that really had to double down on it because there were some jurisdictions saying, yeah, sort of, maybe. Gideon versus Wainwright. Basically, this reaffirms the Sixth Amendment right. This person was caught breaking and entering. He, though, was poor and indigent, basically. And so the judge decided, well, we're not going to pay for a lawyer for you. That's expensive. You represent yourself. So he did. And he actually did a quite capable job, frankly. But he still was found guilty and was sent to 5 years in jail. Now, he did something really, really important here. He was a smart guy. He was just a criminal in this case. He was found guilty by this court or this jury. But he issued a writ of habeas corpus from his jail cell. What this is, it's a note, it's a email today, you could do it in email, handwritten in his case, to a higher court that said, I didn't get a hearing with a lawyer present. The writ of habeas corpus is an English thing. It goes back to Magna Carta, right? That's like hundreds and hundreds of years before our US Constitution. Here's what was happening. We had noblemen in England who weren't maybe paying their taxes the way the king thought they should, or they were running to Parliament to vote for something that he didn't like. And the king just randomly would arrest people, throw them in jail, and leave them there to rot until they either paid the fine or he felt satisfied that they'd been punished enough. No legal hearing whatsoever. So in Magna Carta, they wrote in a thing called the writ of habeas corpus. It's called bring forth the body, where if you are arrested by the executive branch, this case, the king, a court, a judge gets to see you, bring forth the body to me as a judge, and the judge will make the determination whether you've been arrested and you're being held lawfully. That is the most, listen carefully, the most important right written into the original Constitution, the original 7 articles. Writ of habeas corpus is such a big deal that they didn't wait till the Bill of Rights to put it in there. They added it in the original document because it is the one that matters most. If they can arrest you and put you in jail under some suspicion for months and months and months and months without charges, What good is the Bill of Rights? This habeas corpus makes all the rest of the rights in the Bill of Rights possible. And when you are arrested within a matter of the day, you will be in front of a judge to see if your rights are being reaffirmed. And if you've been arrested properly, or it was just a vendetta like the king throwing these noblemen in jail. This right goes back way deep into English history. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Gideon got out because he didn't have a lawyer paid for by the state. So he didn't have the benefit of counsel. All right, has everybody got Wainwright? Okay, really important case. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to talk about habeas corpus a little bit more, and that's why I'm going to this these slides here. What we had back in way back in history is we had a conflict among religious groups, and in Europe it was called the 30 Years' War, and it was, well, pretty rough stuff, especially in Central Europe and Germany in this area here. It affected all of Europe. I mean, Spain's going through the Inquisition. You guys have read about that in school, right? I mean, they're taking their religion really seriously here. You will belong and support the dominant religion of our country or else kind of an attitude. But in Germany, where you had Lutherans living in the north and Catholics living in the south, it got particularly heated, especially as Spain kept pumping money into the Catholic side. I can't tell you how many times Spain tried to invade England in order to bring them back from Anglicanism to Catholicism. You guys remember 1588, the Spanish Armada? That's what drove that. So lots going on here. Okay, before 1648, which ended this war in a thing called the Treaty of Westphalia. We don't have time to go into that. But what we do have time in is to go into the problems in England. Now, England had fought, was in the middle actually of this particular time, in their own English Civil War, basically over two issues: no taxation without representation, and oh, by the way, whether Puritanism or Anglicanism would become the Church of England, their perspectives on it. Scotland had already converted to a Calvinistic Presbyterianism. They were still separate, but had a shared monarchy. Not enough time to go into that. But what happened in England is the Civil War, well, it went back and forth based upon the intensity of the Puritans versus Anglicans. All right, out of that Civil War came freedom of religion. Catholics still existed there too, and they were always caught in the middle. So they came to an understanding that in Scotland, Presbyterianism would be okay. In England, Anglicanism, Catholicism, the Puritan version of that would be fine. And they would just kind of let the whole thing rest. So this is kind of the start of freedom of religion. But it doesn't apply to crazy fringe groups like the Quakers. They're still banned. Okay, who are the Quakers? All right, and who is this guy? Well, this guy's William Penn, right? William Penn Jr. became somehow the absolute proprietor of a large colony in the Americas. Basically, the King Charles II gave him a huge landed area called Pennsylvania. He became the sole owner of that. His name is William Penn Jr. How on earth can a pacifist Quaker be given so much land in America by a king? Well, the king was paying a debt, because it wasn't William Penn Jr. that he was paying back. It was William Penn Sr., his father. His father was the head of a prestigious Anglican family, right? So they were on the royalist side in the Civil War. He became a hero in the first big battle against the Dutch, called the First Anglo-Dutch War. He led squadrons at sea at some famous battles, which we won't go into, but these are kind of important. And then he led the attack on Hispaniola, as Hispaniola, you know that, but this was the original island that was taken by Columbus, right? And the British in this war, they got into war with Spain. And they wanted to take the Hispaniola, but when they got there, the whole attack failed. So they settled on Jamaica instead, which is a big island below Cuba. And that's why English is spoken in Jamaica. But that was a big deal. That was a big hero. Then when the king, who'd been, well, his father had his head chopped off, Charles I, okay, the king was in exile, living in the Netherlands. When they decided that this English Civil War was just too big of a mess to sort out, they brought the king and restored the king to power after about 20 years, where England was an actual republic under Oliver Cromwell. A long story, don't have time for it today, but that's the brief summation. The problem was the king was dirt poor. He'd spent all of his money in exile. So he took these big loans from very rich Anglicans, and boy, the way to make money is to be a captain of a ship and to win battles. And so this guy, William Penn Sr., actually sailed the boat across the channel to bring the king back to England to reinstitute the monarchy in England. And he gave Charles a loan. Excuse me, William Penn gave Charles a loan. That was what was being paid off. So when you look at Pennsylvania, it's not named after William Penn Jr., the founder. It's named after his father because the king insisted on it. All right, now let's talk about the son, though. Here's the son. Wow, he's a character. His father was a fabulous warrior. He was, no, I'm not going there. And he joined a new religious group led by George Fox, who was the founder, called the Quakers, which don't believe in war at all. The Quakers, of course, get banned because if you're at war constantly with the Dutch and the Spanish and the French, you know, if you have all your population turned into Quakers, guess what? That does not a Navy or Army make. And Quakers were considered outside of Christianity. One of the reasons why they were considered subversive to authority. First of all, I'm not going to join your war. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to say the pledge. I'm not going to swear a loyalty oath to the king and country. Because under their interpretation, thou shalt not swear, that one of the 10 commandments, literally means not foul language, as it's often interpreted today, but swearing an allegiance to something other than God. So they wouldn't sing God Save the Queen. Now, look, he's a rich kid. He gets an appointment to Oxford. He goes to Oxford, where he's asked to write his research paper. And he writes a research paper called The Sandy Foundation Shaken. You can still go read it, where he spoke against the Anglican and the Presbyterian and the Catholic version of the Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. Read the Nicene Creed sometime, you'll understand what that's about. It was just a common attack by Unitarians and also by the Quakers, and this was considered anti-Christian. So the Quakers were not allowed to preach in public. He got himself thrown out of Trinity College in Oxford. They told him to take a hike. That's going to be an interesting Thanksgiving dinner home with Dad. Okay, let's get this straight. I've sent you to Oxford. You've been thrown out for sedition and subversion of your religion. And oh, by the way, I'm one of the most prominent Anglicans and a warrior. And you're what? I'm a Quaker. The Quakers believe in nonviolence. They also are supremely tolerant of other points of view. If you want to read that and argue with it, they're totally down with that. Let's just have an open, honest discussion. But they were perceived as a threat. And one of the tenets of this religion is that they must share the word. A lot of religions have that. Raise your hand if you know a religion that one of the requirements is to share the word, right? It's part of the whole thing. Oh, isn't that the whole Watchtower versus Stratton case? You can't deny someone's right to practice their religion, part of which was just to share the good word. Yeah, this is the Stratton case in England in 1670. This young kid goes out, preaches a Quaker sermon in public. That was illegal. Gets arrested. Has he broken the law? Yes. He goes to court, and there's a jury of noblemen up there, and the case goes on, and the judge is sitting there, you know, obviously this kid's guilty. I mean, he's even admitting it. The jury, though, deliberated. And here's the key point to the entire story. The jury came back and acquitted Penn. I think they just thought the charges were nonsense. So William Penn leaves the scene. He's actually just a very anecdotal part of the story. He goes home, acquitted by a jury. The judge was so furious that he arrested all of the jurors and sent them to jail, no food or water too for a while, until they changed their mind and slapped them with fines. If you don't come up with the proper verdict, you're going to go to jail, pay a fine, and we're not going to feed you for days. Whoa. This is called jury nullification, where the judge overrules a jury verdict. Except for the fact that these rich noblemen had a lot of friends and they understood habeas corpus, a right given to them in Magna Carta. So issuing a writ goes to the equivalent of the Supreme Court person, right? I'm going to jump back here. The next court up. And the Chief Justice basically will be like Chief Justice John Roberts for us. He looked at this and thought, this is ridiculous. He ordered all of the jury freed, and he told the judge the right to overturn a jury verdict doesn't exist. Their verdict is final. You can't overturn it, establishing the fact that you can't nullify a jury. That exists in our law today. The jury verdict is final. But what's important here is notice the tool they used. It was the same tool used by Wainwright. It's called the writ of what? Habeas corpus. Here, I've been arrested illegally. A judge picks up the case and says, yeah, you have been. And oh, by the way, judge, you can't nullify a jury verdict. Let's just go through the facts of the case just one more time really quickly. 1670, arrested for illegally preaching a Quaker sermon. Judge demanded a guilty verdict. Jury acquitted Penn. The judge fined and imprisoned the jury, put them in jail for 3 days without food or water, and charged them a fine. 4 jurors refused to pay the fine. 1 juror, Edward Bushell, obtained a writ of habeas corpus to Chief Justice Vaughan, who sat on the highest court of England. This basically would be like John Roberts in our system. He discharged the writ, released the jury, and called the power to punish a jury, quote, absurd. Wow. William Penn goes on to establish Pennsylvania. He was one smart person. In 1681, Charles II granted the charter for Pennsylvania and Delaware to this kid to pay off his debts. Okay. And when a name was brought to him by Penn, here's what I think we should call it. Let's call it this. Let's call it this. This kid was really excited. You can tell. Yeah, I get my own colony. This is going to be great. He said, no, you're going to call it. There's lots of woods in the area. It's very beautiful. How many been to Pennsylvania? Right? It's gorgeous, isn't it? I mean, Pennsylvania is a lovely place. A lot of woods. So we're going to use the Latin term Penn for your father, Penn's Woods in Latin, which is Pennsylvania. This kid sat down and single-handedly wrote a handcrafted democratic constitution for this huge territory. It remained the constitution for this territory until the Revolution, and then it became a state, and so they wrote a new one. But in his original constitution, which lasted throughout all this time, he called for free, fair trials by jury. No kidding. He also charged with freedom of religion. If you came to Pennsylvania, they didn't care what your religion was. And he ended unjust imprisonment for things like debt. Why would you imprison somebody if they can't pay their debts? They can't work. It's extortion. you put them in jail and somebody else has to pay their fine, or you sell them into indentured servitude in the Americas. That's how that works. So he ended that practice. Oh, and he was the first to talk about and actually implement free elections. Free meaning people don't have to pay for it. Actual have elections. William Penn was one remarkable founder of our country. And what you should also know is his city, Philadelphia, is the city of brotherly love. That's what that means. And its most prominent citizen in later times was who? Who's the most prominent citizen of Pennsylvania? You don't know? Yeah.
Like modern day or?
No, back in colonial times. Founder of our country. One of the key founders of our country, who made his home in Pennsylvania, was a printer, very rich, self-made, inventor, scientist. Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin Museum's there. You guys haven't watched your National Treasure, have you? Watch that movie. You'll get to see that. Ben Franklin. Now, Ben Franklin, was he instrumental in how our Constitution came together? And did he live in the state that had the most modern Constitution available to it? Absolutely did. And it's no wonder that Pennsylvania and the city of Philadelphia became the most populous city in the early colonial America. And that's why they went there to write the Constitution and the Declaration too. It was the most enlightened of American cities and the biggest and the most prosperous. And it was established by Quakers. Oh, one little quick caveat to this. The anti-slave movement in America began with the Quakers in Pennsylvania. They were the ones that ignited the abolitionist movement. Quakers played a huge role in our history. And it was William Penn that did all that. I just think that's a great story. Love telling it. Now let's get back to our cases. Okay, so we now have, let's see where we're at here. Wrong lecture. Excuse me, this is, let me go back to my history. I just got rid of it. Here we go. I closed it instead of opening it. So let's get back to our cases now. So we've done Miranda, Gideon versus Wainwright. We've done Roe v. Wade. We've done Dobbs. All these cases are really important. And let's do a few more. This case here, and the reason I wanted to give you an understanding of this before I taught you about William Penn, isn't it the same case as teaching a Quaker sermon? Yeah, it is. And so the Jehovah's Witness group was able to bring this case to court and win basically the same way that William Penn faced the same charge, essentially. Now, we, I think, ended up with Yoder, right? Did we do Yoder yet?
We got to it.
We just got to it, right? We did Stratton, though, right?
Yes.
Okay, same problem that William Penn faced back in 1670. The Jehovah's Witness and other religious groups are facing in Stratton in modern times. This is a precedent-setting case. Very important. What two groups can preach in public, including knocking on your door and say, hey, can I share a story with you? That kind of thing. Or a pamphlet or a good word. Who else can do that other than religious people? Yeah.
People running for public office.
That's it. If you're running for public office, the no solicitation sign doesn't apply to you. Now let's get to another case that was a very important one. Wisconsin versus Yoder. Now, Yoder is obviously Amish here. You can see by the picture. How many know a little bit about Amish life and whatever? It's pretty cool, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. And by the way, the Amish are expanding. And so are the Mennonites. I mean, they're just expanding all over. They believe in agriculture. They are brilliant at it. And they want to divorce themselves from all of the modern foibles of society. I don't think they would be big fans of Facebook. Let's put it that way. And so living a traditional life, even speaking in some communities, their original language from Europe, they just want to live apart, and they don't want their kids to go to public schools because you guys all know public schools are a little weird and crazy, and be exposed to those kinds of difficulties. Do they have to send their kids to school in Wisconsin under Wisconsin law? Raise your hand if you think they should be forced to send their kids to school. Raise your hand if you think they shouldn't be. The sentiment here is obviously with the Amish, right? Except that the state law in Wisconsin said you have to send kids to school for the basic curriculum, math, science, language arts, history, that kind of thing, biology, and so on. You have to do it. It's the state law. So they lost this case. So suddenly, the Amish kids had to go to public school, period. Now, they did make some accommodation, just so you know, the Wisconsin people are very cool. They allowed the schools to be within their own communities. They would bring teachers in, right? So they tried to go along with that, except that, wait a minute, this creates an issue. Couldn't the Amish just homeschool their kids? Which is kind of what they were doing anyway. So doesn't this say that homeschool's illegal? Dun, dun, dun. Wait a minute. We have a lot of students at UCAS, very high proportion, who are educated at home until they got to here, right? How is that legal? You guys don't know this story? After Yoder, starting actually in Minnesota, but there was a movement to allow homeschooling. What's the only way you can allow homeschooling, though, given the fact that the law says everybody must go to school? Oh, come on. Say what?
Like a curriculum that they give the.
They do give some guidance, yes, but what has got to happen before it's legal? Yeah. Come on now, think now. Who has got to make this legal? Yes. It doesn't take the Supreme Court. It's not a court. The courts backed up Yoder because the law in Wisconsin says you have to go to school. This is a Supreme Court case. If the law in Wisconsin says you have to go to school, do you have to go to school? Yes. So then how do you change that? You have to write another what? And pass it through the state what? Can the court become activist and override the state legislature? No. So the Supreme Court simply upheld the state law. This is what the people voted for. They voted for these people. They said this. But then what happened is in the state of Wisconsin and in the state of Utah, they passed a new law. Now, the neat part about this story, you should know, is that a lot of parents who have sent their kids to this school specifically were the parents behind lobbying the state legislature of Utah to make it possible. Okay, so homeschool is not only legal, but I've learned here from experience, very effective, right? We had a fun discussion last hour about the fact that those that were homeschooled, when they got into COVID and had to go back to that it was just like following a script. You've done it for 8 years and you're back into that mode, and they were able to cope quite nicely with. Anybody else have that experience, kind of, that feeling? Yeah. And maybe those that had never had that homeschooling experience didn't have that homeschool structure, so maybe they struggled a little bit more. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I do know is that homeschool is effective, and the families that fought for this in the state legislature sent their kids here, which is really kind of a special thing. I've met with those parents, we've talked, and it's just a great story how you can lobby and change the law. Now, here's how it works. You have to be approved. It has to be approved under state law. And here's how it works. You have to file an affidavit with the school district. So you walk into the local school district, say it's here, this would be Alpine School District here in Orem. You go down to the district office there, you fill out a form and you sign it. When you sign the form, the parent assumes the sole responsibility for the education of the school-age minor. So the school district knows that job's being done by the parents, not by us, okay? So the parents take it over. Now, once the school district has notarized the affidavit, it's put on file. And it used to be a yearly update, but that law got changed too. That was just too burdensome. I mean, every year, come on. So it just lasts until you want to make a change. Now, here's another part that I really like. Now you have to refile if you move districts. So if you move from, say, Alpine District to Nebo District, then you have to refile with the new district. That makes sense. But here's the other thing too, what they got into the law. And if you discontinue your home education, then you go and you fill out another form, said you're not doing it, and you send them back to school. Now, here's the thing. The law enables homeschool students to transition smoothly to public school. Did any of you have any trouble getting into UCAS? Was there any special obstacles put in your path? Same as everybody else. I know students under this, we've talked over the years, for example, at home, they had a homeschool situation, but there was a math class, for example, where the parents didn't feel qualified really to do it. So they would send them to, say, Mountain View High School just for that one class. Can you do that? Yeah, absolutely. And another student I remember wanted to play sport. I can't, one was golf, I think. The other one I think was football, I'm not sure. But they got to participate with the team of the local high school, right? Equal with everybody else. So there can be no discrimination going to and from. If you wanted to go to school for a semester and decide you don't like it and go back to homeschool, that's possible too. So it has to be a smooth transition back and forth. So in Wisconsin today, there's a new law allowing homeschool. So Yoder, while the precedent still, is moot because the state law changed. By the legislature, not the courts. Everybody got that? That's a good little nuance there, I think. But homeschool is legal and it's also effective, but the law had to be passed to explain it. And are there guidelines given, some basic guidelines as to the subject matter? I'm not so sure. I don't know. Here's the next part. Freedom of religion is still the most litigated thing. I'm reviewing a case that you guys know before, the Scopes monkey case. Remember that, the monkey trial? Where we taught it before in terms of a political candidate, right? Who was a populist who jumped on board this case as an attorney, you know. Basically, here's the deal. In 1925, the teaching of evolution in schools was a brand new thing. The biology curriculum had been rewritten over the last century by Darwin and others. And this new biology was being taught by Scopes. The state said you can't teach that. And the state won. Scopes was convicted in 1925. That's why that's such an important case. Interesting, right? Since then, there's been new precedents set. Here's the deal. The Supreme Court ruled against an Arkansas law banning instruction on evolution in schools in 1968. I remember that case. I remember it. We grew up with that one. Basically, in Utah, it was never an issue. Biology teacher taught biology and science. Religion was done by seminaries. In 1968, though, Arkansas tried to ban the teaching of evolution in their schools. It was turned down. Then this case set the precedent. Edwards v. Aguilard in 1987, when basically in Aguilar, I believe this is Louisiana case. Louisiana law said if teachers talk about evolution in class, they must also talk about creationism and give the biblical version of creation. Okay, what's the problem with that? Yeah.
If you're saying that you're going to give a choice on like religion, you talked about this before, like you have to represent all religions. Like, are you going to represent this idea?
You get an A+ on that answer. You get an A+ on that answer. Well done, you. Yes. You could see where that was going to be used as a precedent, right? And I'll go into a different aspect of that, but that was just bloody brilliant, I got to tell you. Okay, but now let's go into this. Is the science teacher a theologian? Are they an expert in the Bible? So what this said is let the church do its job in its respective sphere. That's why your answer was so brilliant, according to McCollum. But let the science teacher just be free to teach science and don't ask them to teach something they're not qualified to teach. I am not qualified to teach anything about religion. Question is though, when I was doing my ancient history class, we have in this readings book, primary source documents, and many of them are religious texts. from the Bible, from the Quran, from Zoroastrianism, from Egyptian religion. Is that legal to teach?
It's history, so yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah. Can you separate what people believe from their history?
No, you can't.
No.
It's part
But
of-
am I preaching that all of you should convert to the cult of Osiris so that you get mummified and go to heaven? No, right? There's a line. Isn't it a pretty clear line? I would think, for me, it's a clear line. I see the difference. But now here was what happened in just 2005. This wasn't that long ago. A group of people got elected by choice. They wanted to flood the school board. They flooded the school board, and they brought a new curriculum to the school that they required the science teachers to teach. It was called intelligent design. Essentially, it's creationism with a book. So that doesn't work. You don't have to worry about the teacher being qualified. Now we're giving you what you should teach. The teachers rebelled. The science teacher said, ain't happening. Becomes a big case. And by the way, the school board was unelected the next election cycle, I got to tell you. But the Supreme Court said, no, you're just doing the same thing, but you're just giving it a new name. And so that's how we separate church and state. And I think it's a healthy thing. I think it is. You let me teach what I know and let the science teacher teach what she knows, and let the religion teachers teach what they know. And I think that's really, how does Hugo's Black say, let each do what they do best in their respective spheres, right? Here's one though for you that might throw a curveball. What's a parochial school? Anybody know? Raise your hand if you know what parochial school means. Okay, who runs the biggest parochial school system in the world? You guys know what parochial school is? Man, if you lived in most parts of the country, you would instantly know that. Right? The West, we don't have so many of them, but boy, you have a lot back east. Do you know what a parochial school is?
I think it's just one where they combine both of those, classes.
And what specific church does this and has probably the biggest education system in the country?
I would assume Christian?
It is, and it's what denomination? Roman Catholic. Roman Catholics set up their own school system in many places before the school system got set up. They're called parochial schools. They're religious run schools by the church. So a lot of people who go to parochial schools, it's the nuns and the priests teaching the classes, right? Yeah. You went to that. Did you really? In Spain.
Yeah.
And so, boy, I tell you what,
So
I,
there's normal teachers and there's teachers that are also what we call brothers that are part of the church.
I love this. This is so good. I want to explore this a little bit more later. Let me finish this discussion and then we'll get to it, because this is just absolutely brilliant. So you went to what we would call a parochial school. The question is, at a parochial school, like the Catholic school system, can they take our tax dollars and use it to educate those children?
Yeah.
Yes, they can. I know. Here's the point I'm trying to teach you right now. The law is, sometimes you just go, but the precedent was set. Yes. So the biggest parochial school in Utah is Juan Diego. Juan Diego is a large high school up in Salt Lake, South Jordan. There's a bunch of others, but that's the biggest one. All right, now here's the deal. People who understand that school, who've been to that school, including a student last period, here's how it works. They get the $6,000 a year to educate the child, but if you go to the science class, is there any iconography? Are there crosses? Are there symbols? Are there Bibles laying around? No. You go in the science class and it's science. But next to it might be one class taught by the brothers, as you said, or in this guy, I think this one's actually Benedictine. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But that class is the religion class. So you go between it and you don't mix the two. Funding is interesting. They have to keep really strict books because the money given by the state can only be for math, science, and the regular curriculum. Anything religious in nature has got to be paid for by the church or through, student tuition. Here's the thing. So can they start their school day with prayer instead of a pledge? Yes, they can. Can we start our school day here with a prayer? No, we can't. Okay, but they can. They can, for example, use their buses and whatever and take the kids on a 2-week religious camp. But that has got to be funded by the church. However, they can use those same buses and take the football team to the state championship, which they tend to win a lot. So they have to show in their books and in their accounting how they've separated the two within the context of the classroom itself. And can you be a non-Catholic and go there? Yeah, they'll let you go. Sure. Parochial schools are, they'll let people in. So it's interesting. Now, have other churches, as Sarah was alluding to, have other churches set up similar systems then? All over these evangelical schools. I have good friends, they send their kids only to evangelical schools. The question is, though, a lot of them don't get funding. All of you that were homeschooled, did you get any money? Did you get any help from the state?
No.
Not a dime. Is that fair?
So,
Well, here's the deal. Vouchers is one way to solve that problem. And that is, what if we, instead of giving the $6,000 per student to the school, the district, and then give it to the schools, what if we just gave it to the parents? And the parents could take that voucher, $6,000, to any school they want, or even use it for homeschool, to buy computers, to buy textbooks, to buy whatever the student needs at home, or to even pay for a tutor to come in to help with math or something. Raise your hand if you're okay with that. Are you okay with that? Raise your hand. No? Yes? Okay, I got to you. All right, here's the deal. Some states allow it. They have a voucher system. I think Florida's one, where you can take your voucher and take it to any school you want. If you don't like the local school, you take it to some other school. I don't know if they allow it with homeschool. I'm not sure on that. In Utah, that was presented to the voters. They had the law written, but they decided to let the voters decide it in a referendum. So the state legislature voted this law in, and then they said, but we're not going to enact it unless the voters are okay with it. The voters turned it down 65%. It was a slam dunk no. Why? What did the parents say? I don't think so. Do you know? What?
It would probably be because like schools that like have less students would get less money.
You got it.
So like really schools like schools that are really good would start getting floodgated because right now we do it district wise. So
Right. Hey, listen, would you cast suffer under a voucher system?
yeah.
Not a chance, right? Your parents would pay. But what about other schools? Would it decimate elementary schools? Make them so they're not profitable, not viable, and they can't get enough kids in. And so parents, especially elementary school parents, said, no, my local school, which I'm happy with, could go out of business, and I'd have to drive my student halfway across town. Great job today. Was that your answer? What was your answer to it?
I was going to come to that, and also how it could also increase tax money.
It might have, yeah.
That'd be
I don't know. That might have been part of the argument. But the Utah voters got to decide that, and they decided, no, we like our local elementary schools, essentially was what they said. So the state legislature didn't do the vouchers. Personally, I don't know. I think vouchers would be an okay thing. I don't think it would make that much difference. Where they've tried it, it hasn't made that much of a difference. I think maybe the unfamiliarity, the change was too much for people to digest, and they worried about their local school. They liked their local teachers, so they wanted to see it fully funded. But in places they've done it, it hasn't seemed to make that much of a difference. Oh, but does it spring up a lot of private schools?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. A lot of private schools would proliferate. And there might be a few private schools, of course, that just do it for the money, right? But you can track that. So I don't think it would have been that big of a problem, but it scared a lot of people that their local school might get hurt. Okay, so now those are tough questions, right? Federal and state monies can go to parochial schools if it's for the secular education purpose. Math, science, that's what secular means, non-religious. Give money to parents to use to pay for parochial education, private schools? No, not in Utah. In some states, yes, but not in Utah. All right, we got through it. That was pretty good. Great job, guys.